But let's go ahead and get started. So one of the reasons why we're focusing on middleware in reference to UCaaS is really because it's getting harder and harder to get people to actually have a conversation with us in terms of sales conversations and getting those appointments set up. And so middleware is one of those low-hanging fruits that enable us to actually initiate conversations much easier with prospects. And we'll talk about how we do that, but it also allows us as salespeople to differentiate ourselves significantly. We'll talk about how we do that as well. There's 3 different strategies that we'll be focusing on. But let's just start out by addressing what is middleware. It's kind of a fancy word for API, but essentially it's a software that sits in between 2 different softwares and allows them to communicate. And in the UCaaS space, this is specifically designed to allow customers to interact with their hosted voice service in different distinct data sets and CRMs and different applications and email services. And so middleware is essentially it's a workforce automation system. So it helps create shortcuts within organizations so that they don't have to necessarily look up information or store information. It's essentially automating processes that normally are done manually. So oftentimes it's just taking components of a process that people go through and automating it based off of existing information. So a few examples of middleware applications. There's Ivanti, which it allows Goldmine to talk to your hosted voice platform. There's Design My Night, which enables hotels and booking companies to integrate databases with their booking databases with their phone service. EMIS is built for healthcare services, which can integrate billing and healthcare records and lots of other great components for the healthcare industry. WCDS is essentially a system that integrates PaaS with their hosted voice system for the educational market. DPS also does integration specifically for law firms for case management. So these are just a few examples of middleware applications that exist today. There's literally hundreds of these already in place. But what's also important to understand are some of the applications of these services. What do they actually do? And this will help you in the context of the conversations that you're having with your customers and helping brainstorm how you can transform their business. So some of the more common ones that we're familiar with in terms of UCaaS and middleware applications are the click-to-dials and screen pops. The screen pops are basically pulling up information that already exists in some type of a database. That database could be a CRM, finance databases, so if you're accounts receivable, you can basically have that background information up right away, or shipping information. So this is basically talking to different databases and making that information available in some type of format. It also has the capabilities to integrate with voice-enabled systems like Alexa. So you can basically ask Alexa to make a phone call or set up a conference call and take a hands-off approach when dealing with your phone systems. A lot of middleware softwares also provide SMS and MMS type integrations, which basically enables your DID to become a texting service. So you can both receive and send text, whether it's from your email or from a chat function. You can send it in bulk, but it's a nice feature for the way people communicate nowadays. And as we talked about in the beginning, middleware's primary function is to streamline workflows. And so giving you access to the relevant notes and information around a specific account relevant to that phone number will definitely create some shortcuts for a company. You can also do bulk dialing in a contact center environment, automated voicemails where you can deposit voicemails and save the time of actually having to record that, which automates a lot of great processes. You can transcribe the phone calls, even translate the phone calls, and make them searchable within the CRM database and perform analytics on that for like a sales team or a support team. So a lot of this is essentially creating those shortcuts and making it a lot easier for you. The list goes on, and this isn't a comprehensive list, but these are some of the key features of middleware applications, but it also helps unify contextual information for the conversation. So it can take in chats, it can take in emails and texts and faxes, across the entire organization for that specific customer and make it all readily available for whoever's on the phone with them. Now, what's really important for this is when you're dealing with real-time applications like voice, it's really important to have this information instantly available. If you're dealing with text or email, this information doesn't have to be instant, and you have the luxury of actually searching for this information. But when you're on the phone with somebody, you really don't have that luxury. It has to be now. And that's where middleware is so important and so essential within the UCaaS space, is you need to be able to pull this information up instantaneously, and also it can have a significant impact in terms of optimizing workforces within those companies. Another fun feature with middleware is dynamic outbound caller IDs. So if you're dealing with sales companies, sometimes it makes sense to modify that a little bit to cater a little bit better to the companies that you're talking to. And this would be a great conversation to have with those organizations. You can also set up automated billing for lawyers, and so they can save that step of having to clock and record the time that they're spending on the phone with their clients. Also with like a customer support company, if somebody misses a call or if there's a voicemail left, that can instantly create a ticket, which is a reference point that they can go forward with and not drop the ball with somebody who needs support. There's also real-time location information services, which will allow you to basically pinpoint where an individual is within a large office environment or school, so that 911 or emergency first responders can find them more quickly, which is probably an easy sell these days with a lot of the educational institutions. You can also monitor employees' activities. This is more than just what we've, generic information about who's made a phone call, but real strong statistics about what's happening. And this is also helpful for HR to help them have better ideas about what's taking place within the company, who's really working, who's working harder, who's on the lower end. Those are things that visibility and statistics are really important. Also, there's monitoring or also database-driven caller ID. So oftentimes these employees may not be answering the phone call because they just don't know who's on the other line or how important it is or have a reference point. So oftentimes our own internal caller IDs are limited, but if we were to tap into other databases like the CRM or email databases or anything else, we can have a much better idea about who's calling and not necessarily depend on our own contact list. There's also the ability to essentially create automated surveys. So oftentimes people are sending out surveys by email, and this is a manual process which can be automated and save them, 30 seconds to 2 minutes on every single phone call by having that go out automatically. There's also great call analytics across the entire organization. So essentially, this is more for the person calling the company, so you can kind of understand how often does this person call? What do they normally talk about? How long do these conversations take? And who are they talking to? And so this helps create better context to help them address the customer more effectively. So all of these are just a few examples of middleware. I know it's a pretty long list. It's not comprehensive. But again, there's some significant business applications here that can make a big impact on these companies. And so getting creative and understanding this is really what opens doors and conversation more normally expect just by talking about hosted voice in a general standpoint. But one of my favorite advantages of using middleware is it allows you to talk to different people within the organization. The IT guy might not care as much that you can pull up shipping information when somebody calls in, but I guarantee you that customer support can. Or accounts receivable would love the fact that they can have that billing information up in front right away, and that would be much more important for them than it would be for that IT manager that we're typically trying to sell the hosted voice application to. And so we can essentially create what we call internal cheerleaders who would champion this opportunity and this product much more than you would normally see with a typical IT manager. And so this really broadens and strengthens the value proposition that we're bringing to the table and allows us to share it with different contacts within the company and let them sell it for us. So the first step in using middleware to open conversations with potential clients is we need to first focus our efforts we need to look at specific verticals and niches. And there's two reasons why we do this. One, it's really important for us in order to have a conversation to open doors with folks is we need to be able to have relevant conversations. If the information or the approach that we're having isn't extremely relevant and resonates with the prospect, they probably aren't going to talk to us. And so talking to specific verticals or niches makes everything we do relevant, which then lowers our customer acquisition cost. And the second reason why we do this is because there's way too much information out there to really specialize or become good at anything. And we really need to be able to differentiate ourselves. Differentiating lowers customer acquisition costs, creates monopolies, and makes the process much easier. So once we've figured out our niche, the next step is to figure out what applications and services already exist that are relevant to the specific niche. Specific CRMs, specific software services, what's out there is basically what's part of this homework process. The next step is to understand the landscape of these applications. How do they work? What type of middleware already exists? And most importantly, what are some of the integration gaps that exist today with these middleware applications, if they exist at all? An example would be sometimes they can do click to dial, but maybe they don't have an auto screen pop available, or maybe they don't even have a manual screen pop. So understanding what exists, what's going on, will lead us to our next step. And there's three strategies that we'll talk about. Some of them are more intense than others, and so don't feel like you have to apply all three. But this is just to get the wheels turning and give you some ideas about how to leverage middleware to really lower your customer acquisition costs. So the first of which is to essentially address these middleware integration gaps directly. So essentially what I'm saying is build your own middleware, so as you do this discovery process of identifying all of these gaps, you can find those gaps and build the middleware yourself. And I'm not necessarily saying that you're going to code it, but you can outsource it. And so there's two different ways that we can outsource this. One is you can use services like Upwork, which is pretty easy. Probably for $50 to $100, you can build most of your middleware applications and get it done within a few days, depending on how complex and how difficult it can be. But there's a lot of great resources on this website. Basically outsource this, and essentially what you're going them to do is to build an API. And a lot of the software services that you're trying to build APIs with already have open APIs that would allow you to do this. So this is something that's pretty much an easy system to build and really creates a nice monopoly for yourself. Another option is licensing. This is probably the best book that I've seen on licensing. Stephen Key, if you're not familiar with him, he was the professor who basically inspired Tim Ferriss to write the 4-Hour Workweek. But he has probably the best outline about licensing. It's basically a pretty simple step and process to protect your idea. So once you've identified, this is the middleware I want to create, that's essentially your idea. Stephen Key's book would help you license it so that you can protect your idea. And typically what you would do is you would take this to like a Vonage or Ring Central or an 8x8 and let them develop it for you, and then earn royalties on every time they deploy that, and plus also maybe create a strategic alliance so that you can use this to your advantage when it comes to prospecting. So again, if you can identify integration gaps, you can build a middleware that addresses this. You can either outsource it through Upwork or license the idea and have somebody else build it for you. Now, if this process seems a little bit too complex and probably outside of your comfort zone, that's okay. I totally understand that. There are folks that would prefer just to kind of stick with the norm, and that's fine. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So the next strategy would essentially be just writing the coattails of people who are already developing software for middleware applications and the services and things of that nature. And so you can essentially just watch for development taking place using services like Google Alerts and tracking both the software and the middleware applications and just keeping tabs on what's going on there. And using that as an excuse to educate partners and customers about that. So if there's a new Chugg CRM feature within the middleware space, then that would be something that would be helpful to share with customers who use Chugg CRM and helping them optimize their workforce environment. Another great resource is like websites like GoIntegrator, which give you a great list of all the latest and greatest changes that have taken place within their middleware space, and letting you know what that means and what's taking place. And you can see just in December alone, there was quite a few updates taking place within the middleware space. The next strategy is going to be similar to the first strategy, and this is probably, again, this isn't for everyone, but it's something to think about in terms of opportunities. A lot of times there are limitations within the middleware that can't necessarily be addressed by the software itself. In other words, you can't build a software to address some of the challenges that exist. Because when you think about middleware, if the data doesn't exist inside of the customer's records, the middleware does nothing for the organization. And so this third strategy is essentially creating a third-party data set that you can dip into as a reference point to enable your customers to have an outside reference point to help pull in data. So what basically a practical example of this would be if you were selling to car dealerships, and if you were to hire somebody on Upwork to either manually pull data from the auto trader or have a script do that for you, you could archive information about what kind of cars people are selling, what they sold it for, when they sold it. And if they were to use that phone number to call the dealership to inquire about a car, that data reference point would be available as a starting point to kind of give them some background about this individual. You could do the same thing within the real estate market. You know, people that are selling homes, how much are they selling it for? Or like with music stores, you could look at different public listings about instruments that people are selling. So there's lots of different public data points that you can pull in and create your own data set. And this wouldn't apply to every industry, but there's definitely some niche markets that you can use this for. And if you can imagine walking into a conversation with a customer with this data set in hand and giving them access to this, this is going to have a huge impact on that conversation. So again, these are some different strategies, some of which may seem a little daunting. They're really not too difficult. Again, you can talk to folks who do this and help build this for you, and it's pretty easy to put together. Now, once you kind of have your strategy in place, your next step is to build referral relationships, because this is probably the strongest referral relationships that you can develop in the marketplace, because probably for the first time, the referral relationships will not be, the value of these relationships won't be based off of commission, but will actually be based off of the value that you bring to their application. So let's go back to the example of selling Sugar CRM. If you're an expert in that, maybe you have a unique data set, or you just kind of really understand this space, or you have enhanced the middleware for that specific CRM, then aligning yourself with sales reps, whoever either support or manage or sell Sugar CRM would make a great opportunity for you to grow your business. Essentially what you're doing if you create these alliances is you're hiring a free sales rep for life. And so these guys will value your expertise in the middleware and the differentiators that you bring to their software. So everything you do makes their software work better and makes it more sticky. And so what you want to do is you always want to go to market together. You want to do co-marketing strategies. You want to do conferences together. You want to visit customers together. If you do that, you'll create a better alliance and really make a big impact on the future of your business. So once you've kind of come up with your strategy, you've aligned yourself with individuals who can help you sell the services, the next step is to go to market and actually start acquiring these customers. And so that's going to require some information about which customers are using which applications. We talked a lot about this in the last call where we discussed SD-WAN, but we're just going to touch upon some of those points again today. If you're an Ensemble member, you can use our data generator tool to go out and find customers who use a specific application. If you're not an Ensemble member, you can use some public tools like Google to help find this information for you. Typically, a great resource for this is job postings. There's a lot of rich information inside of that where people talk about job requirements and software experience and different aspects. And so if you search different job sites for applications, you'll typically get a good list of companies who require some type of experience with that application. But most job postings have a short shelf life. And so what you'll need to do is use Google's archiving data to find historical data on job postings, because again, they do disappear once they expire. And so you can use the tools service and set up a range of dates, which allows you to go back in time and basically search different job postings for different applications, which will then tell you which companies use those applications and then be able to cater to them. There's some other tools within the DNS space, which again we talked about on the SD-WAN training, and we actually went in more depth on that one, but you can use tools like NX Toolbox, Upsell Reports, or NS Lookup on your Windows PC to perform DNS lookups. And there's a few code examples of what the records that are found within DNS, what they actually mean within the application space, that you can use this as an indicator of trying to figure out who's using what applications and using that to your advantage in the discussions that you're having. Now, our last note that I'd like to bring up today is one of the best methods of acquiring customers is using surveys. And we've talked about this, and we'll do a specific training about this in the future. But rather than trying to sell a service out front, the best way to start a dialogue is using surveys. And so essentially what this does is it allows you to start a conversation of investigation. You can explain that you're kind of an expert within this niche, and you just kind of want to understand something about their business. And that's something that would be important to them to also understand from a broader perspective. So you can use the survey as a way of explaining, you know, I'd like to gather this information, but if you're willing to also share this with me, I'll share what I find out from your competitors. And so this creates a great opportunity to create a dialogue that's outside of the sales conversation, but essentially it creates that sales conversation from an easy angle. But also the second advantage of this is once you have those data results, that creates a significant value to future conversations with prospects. So that's everything we have for today. If anybody has